Don't make any purchasing decisions based on what we talk about today. And I'll kick it over to Sagan to get us started.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sagan Da Silva. I am a principal success manager on the partner success team at .org, and I happen to have a background in anthropology. My experience at the company has been, I've been involved with some of the biggest Red accounts, some of our key and strategic customers and partners. I have also helped build process design and actually navigate internally and externally pretty well. And one of the secrets to me is I actually use anthropology for how I run my business and how I impact others. And so we're going to cover how anthropology, when it's applied to businesses, we can actually dive in and create better experiences, better cultures, and actually just better success stories for our customers and for ourselves. So I actually reached out to one of my professors who was a mentor of mine named Dr. Nicholas Band III. And I don't know if anyone's heard me say this before, but if you have worked with me in the past, you've heard me say in meetings, it's like playing jazz. It's an art form. There's a number of improvisational aspects of how we have meetings and how we engage, but there's also a lot of research. And that type of research is called ethnographic research, to understand a culture so that you can actually then work with it. And Dr. Bayham would say, I'm a giant teddy bear. He said if I wanted to call that out, I could. But one of the secrets for me is empathy and how I look at cultures based on my experiences growing up and just in my life and applying the anthropological lens to it. And so that's what comes today, to really have a discussion about how our partners and Salesforce are actually creating cultures and solutions for our customers. And so that is really where we have Tiffany Spencer, who is from Eastward Consulting, but has created a solution in market or a program using anthropology to create HBCU Force. Ruben Singh from 1/10 Consulting is here to discuss his engagement with diversity and inclusion by getting a certification from the Cornell program and how that has impacted his business interaction with customers. And then Jessica Langeland, sorry, Jess, if I did it. Did I butcher the name?
It was close enough. Sounded like the Dutch version, so I'll take it.
I apologize. I should be better at that. But I do thank you for actually correcting that. And Traction on Demand, where she's the VP of Consulting Nonprofit Solutions, created an application called Better Me, which actually tracks, using anthropological methodology, their employee sentiment, how they're actually working, mentorship programs to establish a culture in which they're getting the most out of their employees and also making sure that their employees are happy and solves retention issues. Now, this is the most important slide to me. I know a number of faces on this slide, either directly or indirectly, and I wanted to say thank you. Everyone on this slide has impacted me in my job at Salesforce, and as a result, impacted others in the ecosystem, because I actually learned from every single one of you. If I work with you, great. If I haven't, you've impacted someone who I work with that has shown a success story or a best practice or a solution that you provided. And I think it's so critical that we learn from each other. And that's why I really appreciate Unite, is because we all come together to share that information and knowledge to make sure that we're actually having more impact in market. And so with that, I want to kind of go over the agenda of what's coming up for today so that it makes sense for everyone and how this is going to be applied. We're going to cover an overview. Then we're going to jump into how it's actually used in business culture and workplace. Talk about how organizational cultures are essential to creating the proper solutions and proper engagements with our customers. And then we're going to talk about alignment of what stakeholders look like. And that's kind of the fun. So let's jump into the first one, which I will say Rob Jordan and Mark have impacted this discussion, because I created this slide title based on what we discussed yesterday. And I changed it to the friction point generator, where you have multiple cultures working together on an assignment or a project. And how do you actually come together with a joint culture and a solution that solves the problem and allows them to evolve into the next step? Using technology, the reality is we are asking people to change their rituals. We're asking them to change their cultures, their workflows, and how they engage with themselves and others. So that's really, I think, where the friction comes in, is because we all have different distinct cultures. Now, that leads me to my fun point, which I geek out about. I had a conversation yesterday with a partner in a breakout session at the Gather Around, and we started talking about this session and what I was going to present. And he was able to take that conversation and go, he said, oh, that's crazy. I like that. Went to a conversation later on that day and had a better engagement with the customer where he talked about cultural change, talked about the impact to how they would, what they would need to do to be successful. And it removed a lot of friction to allow them to actually have a better conversation about what that roadmap and vision looked like, where they were buying into the fact that they were being taken into account what this meant for them. And anthropology allows you to do that either through direct theory or applying it. And within business anthropology, which we're really going to focus in today, cultural and linguistic anthropology are important. And I think it's going to basically highlight how we as groups together as with distinct cultures work together, and we can improve that for ultimately the success of the ecosystem, the missions of the people that we serve. Now, the missions that we serve are all nonprofits, are educational institutions for the most part. And they all use anthropological methodology as the foundation for their work. It's ingrained in how we run our businesses. As a nonprofit, you have to come up with a research. You have to figure out what the problem is, come up with a solution, figure out how you're going to get grant work done, have the discussion, see how you're going to measure the impact. These are all things that we have committees on at this point. Our products, we're working on our solutions with our partners. And the reality is that all these things are tied back to the fact that a lot of anthropologists go into the fields that we serve and use these methodologies. And how do we actually impact them? So results that matter. And with this, I'm going to kind of break out some real world examples of anthropology and how it's impacted business cultures. And it actually just kind of, in my opinion, change how the world works. And so the first one is going to be from our friend, Mark Benioff directly. And it's going to cover the gender gap, pay gap, and the term beginner's mind. At Salesforce, two executives, female executives, had brought up the fact that there was a potential gender pay gap, and that resulted in the fact that Mark taking a beginner's mind approach, where he said, what's the data actually show? How do we actually use this data and how do we then at that point improve it so we can improve the gap that exists? And with that, we were able to use the methodology to figure out how we could improve gender gaps. And we do that year over year now, in addition to having programs in place to prevent it from all new net employees. This is the fun one for me. I think everyone's been enjoying the music, hopefully, for Unite. We had actually been trying to change how music was done at this conference. And last year we did an exercise where we tried to do a survey. And unfortunately, we didn't get enough participation in the survey to actually make impact. And we realized after talking to a number of people that the approach might have to change. And what we did is we took some of those sample lists and we actually sent that over to a music curation expert, which is DJ Diallo or Diallo Riddle. And he was able to create the playlist that you're hearing, which took into account the fact that we were not able to use surveys effectively to make a change. And I think it's been very successful from what I've been able to hear in the feedback that we've received so far. And then the partners who create the cool stuff. And so they really are about creating these solutions. We cannot do it alone. The thing about partners in the .org space that I really, really enjoy is that they are building with their expertise of the market and industry, how to come up with better solutions with the customers that they're working with, to create better cultures that are going to be impacted. And they've done some amazing work in market, and they've created some amazing programs to help others. And I think it's just something that we need to call out as time goes on in this presentation. We'll have an opportunity to dive into what that looks like a little later on. Now, when we talk about anthropology, it's a foundation of how we do business. These are terms that you see all the time, and I love a Red account. I shouldn't admit that, but I love them because they give me an opportunity to really understand what's happening in an account, how we can actually make it better. And it involves a lot of research and having conversations. And for me, that is essential to creating change of cultures at organizations internally and externally. But we use all these things that are based on methodology of anthropology, but we call it different things. You might learn it in a different place within school, but it's foundational. And I think oftentimes, if you can cut through the jargon, you can actually look at the actual methodology very clearly. Now, I think that discovery is key, and I think we often, as partners and consultants and members of Salesforce, we really are strong in how our cultures align. And once you work for a company, you are immersed in their culture. You're immersed with the interactions that you have with someone. So how can you go into an organization and really understand what their use cases are and their needs if you're not learning? You have to immerse yourself in it. You have to talk to as many people as you can. You have to engage, research, study. But then at the same time, another key aspect of methods is that you have to understand that every interaction with any environment creates rituals, behaviors, and just systems of development. And so when we go in with technology, we are actually changing the way organizations interact with their environment. We change their rituals, we change their workflows. And so we have to understand, we have to really dive into understanding what we're asking them to change and preparing them. Linguistics, and this one's fun. This one's actually also, I think, a challenge in that we use a lot of jargon. And jargon is a challenge because it actually can serve as a way of showing expertise, but can also serve as a gatekeeper mechanism to isolate and exclude people from conversations who have not been able to learn those things. We look at acronyms within one organization to another, they change. But if we use language that is shared, we can normally get to a solution and include more people and learn more. Archaeological, Indiana Jones is the first thing that comes to mind, but you have to have some type of study of history, how those cultures came to exist. Sometimes you can't have access. And when we look at business cultures, you have to look at what was successful, what's their adoption, how many engagements have they done previously, and what were their experiences? That is a form of archaeological research as well. And last is the human biology component, which is how we develop. We talk about attention span. We talk about how someone can engage. All of these things when we are saying, hey, we're building an application, but we know this person is going to feel that it's slow. Why is it slow? We have to actually have that conversation because that's how they perceive it. And I think as we move forward with the methodology, as we start diving into these frameworks that are actually part of our key components of our business, we start talking about what the culture itself is. And culture is basically broken down into values, which we have core values, behaviors that are good, right, ethical, or moral. And that could be different between cultures. What is good for one culture could be bad for another. And you have to come up with some type of way to figure out how you're going to create a new culture or come to an agreement. Norms and laws are behaviors that are standardized, and those become codified with laws such as anti-bribery, anti-fraud, things that we know are just within society that we, whichever culture you're in, there are things like that. And then folkways and mores are fairy tales, religions, or traditions that exist. And I think we all have core values, norms, and laws, and this is something that we all have to be appreciative of, especially within a global business, because every culture, every business is different, and we have to take the time to understand it. And so with that, I want to kind of open it up real quick to ask some questions to those of you who are participating in the chat, to ask, give me some examples of values your organization has. And if those on the panel, if you want to kind of talk to those also, go ahead and come off mic and speak to what those are for you. Empathy, okay, making impact, transparency, caring, curiosity, honesty. I think these are all actual values that we all hold dear. These are things, humility, see, that's a good one too, mentorship. We could just keep going with the core values of how we build ourselves and the organizations that we work in and how others influence our values as well. And then with norms and laws, we have norms, behaviors that we actually use as society. I would say a norm that we use for the industry is discoveries, RFIs, RFPs. Those are norms, those are behaviors that we leverage. And then folkways and mores, give me some examples of some things that you do culturally that are traditional within your experience? I will ask you to chat once again to give me examples. For me, music is a very big thing about my culture. We use it as meditation. We use it for parties. My dad's from Trinidad, so we use a lot of, one of the traditions is Carnival, which is typically served as a time of release and enjoyment. And that's a tradition that I and my culture uses very closely. Also, national anthems, flags, museums, mentor, yep, all great examples. So I will kind of give you the ones that I know right off the top of my head, and some of the ones that the panel actually mentioned also. And Pledge of Allegiance, yes, that is a folk way. Next slide, please. So I think you know Salesforce's core values. So I think we lead with our core values. We talk about trust, customer success, ethical use. But when I was talking to the panel and the other partners who were involved with this, and I've talked to numerous partners within the .org space and also my coworkers, a term that comes up often as a value is being of service. And I think that is what links all of us together, is how do we actually make situations better and drive impact and be of service and give who we are to others to make it better. Norms, good faith is a term that we use all the time. Jargon, language. We have folk ways and mores, which are traditional work hours. I thought one that was really a good example is, depending on which book you read from which region, you will hear you use silverware. Well, that doesn't really work for a multinational geo call in which people might use their hands, for instance, like my wife does, or you have the aspect of chopsticks. And so when you actually are having a conversation with an office, with a region, with a multinational or multicultural thing, you wanted to say what tools one eats with. And that's something to keep in mind when you're actually interacting with anyone from a business perspective. Now, I think it's really key that we all love data. I think data is how we all work. I think it's something that we all leverage. We talk about how data can be leveraged, how data can be cleaned, how we get success stories, how we do all these aspects of our businesses. And to understand how data is leveraged is key. And we use these methods all the time. And I'm kind of going to go over them really quickly to kind of go over why the engagement is going to actually change how you work. So when we do any type of work at Salesforce or as a partner, the very first thing we want to do is really kind of have a conversation with someone. We want to observe what they're currently doing with their systems or workflows. We want to have in-depth conversations. We want to understand what the stakeholders are talking about. Why is this a cultural change? Why is this so important for them to actually meet their goals or have better impact for their constituencies? Then we have focus groups, which is UAT. This is business stakeholders. And then we have text analysis, which is really focused around understanding the reading, the materials, the cultural guidelines, or the process design that they've made. And these are just basically creating a narrative that you can create with the experiences of others. Now, that's great. But then as I explained in the example with the gender gap closing, what was essential there was actually leveraging metrics and data itself. And that is where quantitative approaches within anthropology come into play. And quantitative approaches are descriptive research. Just, hey, here's all this stuff. What do the numbers say? What does it tell you? Casual comparative. Well, you compare a couple variables, see what's going to happen there. You have correlational research, which is more along the lines of you have a hypothesis and you basically are able to test that. And then experimental research, which I think a really great example of this is the Impact Labs at Salesforce.org, in which they're actually running scientific approaches with the technology to understand how they can make situations better. A prime example is our Impact Lab on homeless populations, are also what we're doing currently around HBCUs. Now, I like to say apply it. And how do you apply all these methodologies? I apply them every day. Every day I sit around, I read, I'm studying, I'm talking to partners, I'm talking to customers, and I'm trying to figure, and I'm talking to my peers to figure out how I can actually apply my lens view of getting down to the cultural components, bypassing all the other things that are taking place to come up with an actual solution to the problem by leveraging this research and this lens view. And that's why I think it's so critical to look at what we're doing as organizations. We are technology companies, but we are all people companies. you have to strive to be a people company so you can understand who you're working with. You have to understand their values, their mentalities, what they're trying to accomplish. You have to speak their language. And the only way you can do that is understanding their culture. To get the solutions, you can just be technology. You can sell licenses or services, but that's really not causing the change that we see in successful engagements with our customers. And I'm sure you've seen the same thing where you create a solution. You're not just a tool. You're not just an idea or a concept. You are building new solutions, and they can be repeatable. You don't have to do 100% custom everything. You can take components and add to it to give them valuable solutions based on what they need. And then finally, always discuss the change of impact. And this is what I was talking about, the story that happened yesterday. By talking about the impact, that there would be change that would be required, they were able to have an honest conversation, and the customer felt heard. They felt as if we had empathy to what they were going to go through, and they were invested to hear a roadmap discussion because they knew that if they did this right, the impact would not only impact their business, it would impact their people, but ultimately would be successful in what they were trying to accomplish within their mission. This is my favorite one. Cultures evolve. We all grow from each other. I have not, if I would be mistaken to say that I know everything. I don't. There's a lot of smarter people than me in the world. There's a lot of more technically savvy. But the thing I can do is I can evolve. I can understand why they're thinking that way. I can understand why they're trying that solution. Maybe we try a different way. If you don't make the effort to try to evolve your culture as a business or work with someone else to help with their transition, you will be inflexible, you will get stuck, and you lose opportunities, and you will not be able to innovate as fast as possible because you will not be taking into account a review of how you continue to improve. And being stagnant in a technology industry or an industry where we're supporting people trying to make change is not going to work in the long run. And so all I can ask you is always think about how you are engaging business cultures and having that discussion, because it's going to open up the conversation in a lot of ways. It shows that you're actually thinking through these challenges. So I'm about to give you my secrets to success of how I deal with problems. I research. It's the foundation of everything I do. But those of you who have had conversations with me realize I'm very consistent in my language. I try not to use jargon, because jargon, I remember the experience of saying, it's going to take me 6 months to a year to learn a language, to learn the jargon, so someone thinks I actually know what I'm talking about, versus creating an experience in which I can have a conversation with anyone within an organization who might have something to add. You can get all the stakeholders involved across the entire business and get people who want to come up with solutions. Once you do those two things, you can actually start determining the impact and determining a strategy to actually solve a problem or make a sale. And then finally, it's the evolution of the culture that you all have agreed to, of what that looks like to solve that use case. And I think for me, that is the key. I try to make sure everyone's voice is part of that joint solution at the end. And again, our partners that you're going to talk to, they do that. You are very successful people. Yes, we can always be better. We always evolve. But again, I think when we bring Salesforce's culture, the culture of our partners, and the culture of the customer together with use cases, solutions, technology, theories, approaches, you get a joint solution and a joint culture that is sustainable and can be measured to seek further improvements and refinements for further growth. And with that, I want to kind of talk to the panel because they're awesome. I've had the pleasure of working with all three of these people in different facets. And so I just think, oops, bad slide. My apologies, everyone. I messed up a slide. It happens. We'll get through it together. Thank you. I just want to kind of have a conversation with you all. And if you want to introduce yourself, Ruben, some of your core values, who you are as a person, that would be great.
Sure, and thank you, Sagan, for framing everything up. That was beautiful. Asking what my core values, I was, I'll be honest, it's not something I get asked a lot in the professional environment, so I appreciate the question. Um, I would say, to be completely honest, my core values are largely tied into my faith tradition. So some of the things that we mentioned in the chat, empathy and humility, equity, service, justice, all of these are things that I grew up with in the environment that I've been brought up in, and the culture that I grew up with. What makes it interesting for me as a Sikh, and having the appearance that I do, it constantly serves as a reminder for me, personally, professionally, in every aspect of the work that I do. And it reminds me of these core values. So when I think of my core values, that I think about it from in a very deep perspective, because it's not something I can run away from. It's something that stares back at me every time I look in the mirror, and it holds me accountable. Sagan, I think you might be on mute.
You know what? I love virtual calls. Tiffany, same question about your core values and cultures.
Yeah. Again, thank you for having me on this panel. And it is an interesting question, something that I also had to think about. One of my core values, of course, is what I call servant leadership, or not what I call, but let's call it servant leadership, being resilient and speaking up or speaking truth. And that the servant leadership, I think, has been something that I learned from my mom. My mom was a volunteer coordinator when I was younger, and I was exposed to a number of volunteer opportunities with the Cincinnati Park Board, and seeing so many people from different backgrounds and different ages that saw value in giving of their time really rubbed off on me. And it really has stuck with me over the years, and has, you can see it in every area of my life. Servant leadership, the resiliency and speaking truth is something that I learned over the years, through my experience in corporate America. Kind of developed those areas and those values, and it's been a kind of a good journey, in building and refining, and developing my values.
Understand. Jessica, can you tell me about your core values?
Yeah, no, and thank you again for the opportunity. It's I've never really thought about anthropology as a business term, so this has been a good learning opportunity for myself as well. On the values side, I think I often think about trust. I think about honesty and community. I also think that Brene Brown in Dare to Lead tells me I can only have 2 values. So I might zero in on the fact that I think community for me is at the core of everything. And I think to have a community is to have trust, is to have honesty, is to have family, or the people you call family. And so that sort of core sense of being a part of something, having people around me that I trust and honor and bring, and we sort of bring each other up, I guess, overall is sort of where it all comes. And I think that anchors in why it is I work in this space. I think the opportunity to support nonprofit organizations is around community, and the missions that those organizations have is core and important to me, that we be able to deliver on that. So I'd say, yeah, at the core of it's community, but tied very tightly to trust and honesty for me.
That has rubbed off on me from all my engagements, all of you, when I speak to you. And it's also been something that I've seen how you engage customers and conversations about sales or success or implementations. And what I want to start off, Jessica, is when you talk about building a community and how that engagement looks, how has that ability to understand other business cultures or cultures in general impacted your customer engagements?
It's a good question. I love that you talked about the evolution of culture a little bit, and I got thinking about that one. And So I will come to your question. I will answer it directly, but I'm going to weave my way there for a moment. I think about Traction itself. I joined at about 90 people, where we just cracked 1,000 people. And the culture of this organization is very different from when we started to where we are today. And I think the same is true of the organizations that we support. The culture of the organization, I think technology ties into how they operate. And so when we're trusted to be the partner of choice that helps them make a change in technology, we're changing the culture in the organization as well. So I think there's a tie to both understanding who the organization is, how they operate, how do we fit into that. We're not there for forever. They have an existing culture, and we have to sort of find our space in that, and then we have to find a space to exit at, and know that we've had an impact on the way they operate. So I think when it comes to getting to know our customers, man, I miss meeting in person. I miss getting to be in an office, to spend time, to take a lunch break and go to their favorite lunch place around the corner. I think that that builds both a sense of who they are, but also a sense of community, coming back to my values, connecting in that way. So, I mean, I think it's incredibly important as consultants that we connect and understand who the organizations are. And I think this world of virtual space makes it definitely a lot harder, and somewhere where we have to be much more intentional and aware of the way we show up, the way we engage, the way someone does disengage. I was on a good call yesterday where someone said, I miss doing demos in person because I could see body language change, and I could then say, this doesn't really seem to be settling in with you, rather than all the off video camera folks who just sort of, you just don't know that something's not resonating. So I think it's just that much harder for us all on all sides to lean in and make sure that we reflect the sense of cultural expectations, I guess, in a Zoom space. So a little bit of a meandering way to answer your question, but I think it is definitely the core of the way I look at how we work with our customers.
That was not meandering. I actually loved it. I thought you touched all bases of how you value the interaction. You value the experience of interacting with someone else and learning from them and experiencing how they see the world. I think that's critical. And so, Tiffany, I'm going to ask you the same question about how these aspects of who you are as a person, the resiliency, the being dedicated to making improvements, has actually changed how you engage your customers and also Salesforce or other vendors or partners.
With our customers, we really take the time to, one, understand where they are and where they want to go, and really look to lead them and serve them so that they feel comfortable adapting to the technology. And it's the same model I sort of use with HBCU Force. When I'm working with students, I need to understand where they are, what are the things that they care about, and how can I serve them and help them to see the bigger picture and to be resilient in their journey of balancing school, learning a new skill. And so there's so many parallels between the consulting world and how I work with clients and how I work with students to put them on a path and walk with them on this path. And that's definitely hard to do without thinking about their values, my values, and kind of merging those two things together. I think I'll stop there for you.
No, I think the work that you're doing with HBCU Force is a prime example. We'll dive into that a little bit more. It's a really good program that you've created that helps students from HBCUs get opportunities that otherwise they were not getting because of just sometimes business culture or perceptions on where talent comes from. And I think we'll dive into that perception and culture and how you've sought to make improvements there to really create opportunities for others. And Ruben, I've got to ask you, there's so much to ask about how you bring yourself and your culture to your engagements. Can you please break this down, sir?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks again. It's funny because earlier on in my career, when I was learning the ropes in consulting, perhaps like some of you on the call, it was all about, hey, this is the tried and true method. This is the methodology. And let's finish, on time and on budget and 65 to 70% billable utilization. Let's go. And I was like, oh, okay, that's how this all works. And so I found early on in my career, I had to kind of throw out those values that I had. Because I learned that like this is the way that you excel. This is the way that you get promoted, and this is the way you climb your way up the ranks. But I'd say that like the further I got into my career, although the things were happening, the promotions were happening, and the successes were getting racked up. For me personally, something didn't feel right. In the pit of my stomach, something did not gel. And so, sometimes I recall sitting in large go live celebrations with clients, and everyone's super happy because we finished on time, we finished on budget, we accomplished everything we said that our statement of work would asked us to do. But if I really ask myself, does the client really know what they got? No. Did we transform them in a way that's going to be sustainable for them? Did we set them up for any kind of long-term success? Not always the case. And I think that's kind of when I realized that I needed to start bringing some of those core values back into my work, and I no longer needed to keep them separate. And that was really one of the reasons that we started 1/10. So for now, in the clients that I work with and the engagements that we have, yeah, sure, we have all the methodologies, we have all the best practices, but I try to go into every engagement just listening, learning, trying to understand who they are as an organization, what makes them tick, pick up on those cultural cues, understand how they work, not how our implementation schedule is going to be fit into their structure, but understand how they can best contribute, what's their cycle of activities as a nonprofit. And now let's figure out what methodology or combination of methodologies are going to work best for them. If anything we've learned in the past year, I'm working with nonprofits that had to completely reinvent themselves, or their services that are required are like 10 times the demand. I can't expect my same methodologies that I used 2 years ago to work. So I need to listen, I need to learn, and I need to adapt to what makes sense for them as well. So, to me, like what I've learned is like the compliment that I hope I get is not, okay, you finished on time, you finished on budget. Like the biggest compliment is how, wow, you really know us, you get us, you understand us. And so that's what we're always trying to strive for in every engagement.
And I think that's key, right? Because as I mentioned, we learn from our partners, and we hope to enable you as well. And I think it's critical that those conversations are happening from our partners with our AEs, who might be anyone who's touching the account, should all be having the same conversation about what that looks like, right? Because I think we all have different insights to how we engage our customers, how we engage the technology. And so I'm lucky to be on a team that we help develop that enablement material for our partners, or we look at how we can make better solutions internally and externally. And so everything that you all said is what's inspiring me every day to come to work, because I learned something new. And as Ruben was kind of describing, he's playing that jazz when he's in those engagements because he's learning, he's improvising, but he still knows the rhythm. He knows the best practice, right? And so I think that has been essential to all of the successes that you are hearing about, how we engage our customers as partners as Salesforce. Now, I love this part, and then I think I want to just ask, right? I know there's a number of projects that people within all of your institutions or organizations are working on. And I want to we talked about Better Me, we talked about HBCU Force. I want to dive in a little deeper there and really kind of have the conversations about that journey, and kind of use the anthropological lens about how you got there to solve these challenges that you thought were there that need to be addressed as partners, or in fact, as building your own solutions for your own teams or customer clients. You know what? We're going to start off with Jessica first. Thank you, Jessica. Would you like to go and answer that question about how you've gotten there?
Yeah, well, so I'll take the better.me sort of project is a good example. You know, I think internally we call it many things, but it started as this desire to understand our team's sentiment when it came to the work that we're doing. How do you put people on the right projects? And Ruben just spoke to the idea of like consulting's hard. It's not an easy space, and I you know I really appreciate that Ruben is taking a better, different approach, one with the learning that you've had. And I think we wanted to better understand what people liked of the work they did and what they didn't like, and maybe we could help them see for themselves where the kinds of roles in the organization that were best suited to them. Was there some kinds of work they were doing that just like really fired them up? And was there some work that they were doing that was just part of the job and they really didn't like? And as we grew, and we could allow for people to go from wearing 3 hats as, you know, both the PM and the business analyst and the lead consultant, and they could then sort of make a choice in their role of like, do I really dive in as the solution architect here, or do I really embrace my organization abilities, sort of star, like that's my genius, and I'm going to go down the path of being a strong project manager with enterprise projects. We could help people see what they really enjoyed. And so it really did start as just an internal tool for us to, as people were doing this sort of typical thing of tracking their hours against the projects they were working on, they also just assessed whether it was amazing, pretty good, mildly painful, or brutal. We just gave them the space to honestly answer. And where that's evolved to at this point and how we've used that, you know, it's a really great early indicator of someone's just not happy in their role, and it gives people a bit of an outlet for their managers to sort of follow up and get a better sense of sort of, you know, what's really underneath this sort of frustration. Is it internally at work, or is it something to do with sort of just personal life that's getting in your way? So it's been a really good conversation opener, and we've grown it to be a product that we've taken. I guess the step in between there was that as we went from getting a better sense of our own sentiment, we started to expose that same sort of question to our customers. So as they were, you know, in our sort of maybe a weekly meeting around the project, we'd be looking at the same sort of tools, and we'd give them the ability to, you know, click on one of 4 smiley or not so smiley faces. So we didn't quite tell them they were choosing brutal, but you know, we could feel the sentiment of brutal nonetheless. And yeah, we've evolved it to Better.me as a product that we could take out and share this idea of getting to understand your team's sentiment, whether that's in a commercial organization of your, you know, service team, and how was their day, or what's that day looking like, whether it's in a nonprofit organization using it with their constituents to understand just sort of where they're at through a program that they're participating. I think this idea of understanding who people are and how they're doing really resonates in a lot of different scenarios. And so that's sort of been the evolution for us of Better.me, and the sort of at the core, just getting a better sense of where did people stand from a sentiment? How happy were people in the work they were doing?
And I think that's awesome, because I think Traction develops a number of solutions for themselves that end up, I think, being shared with customers because they become repeatable. The methodology is solid. There's constant review, and that's another example, because I think you've added mentoring to Better.me as well, which was not originally one of the components to make sure people are being guided to where they might want to go next. I think that was a really huge adjustment and an improvement to measure the impact and figure out how you can make it better. So I just want to call that out. Tiffany, HBCU Force. Tell me how that came to be, and why it came to be. I think it's a great story of people making impact in people's lives.
Yeah, so I am a graduate of Bethune-Cookman University, which is a HBCU in Daytona Beach, Florida, founded by Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune. And I'm pretty active at the university when I could go in person. And going into some HBCUs, or in some schools in general, are smaller. And so it's more of a family atmosphere. I was able to, you know, go and visit my old professors, and they allowed me to come into their classroom. And then speaking with some students about what they wanted to do, you know, of course, I didn't hear Salesforce administrator or Salesforce consultant. That wasn't, you know, one of the job titles. And I began to tell them about my role and what I did as a Salesforce consultant, and about the different career paths in Salesforce. And of course, they had no idea. They were not familiar. And as I began to look across the ecosystem, there were many, many success stories of individuals that had transitioned from other career paths into Salesforce. And there just weren't that many HBCU students in, in those stories. And I wanted to be able to help diversify the types of stories that were being told about the career path, people that were making the transition or starting on the road to being Salesforce consultants. And so I started working with some students voluntarily, teaching them about Salesforce. I worked with a few professors there to what I call volunteach. And to kind of build out this curriculum and try to connect with students to figure out how I could expose them to Salesforce and explain the ecosystem to them. And from that was born HBCU Force. I saw an opportunity to marry my love for HBCUs and Salesforce. And you know, at the time, there was no official kind of Salesforce initiative around HBCUs. And so I saw an opportunity to take that on. And people always ask me, and you know, what should I do? How do I get involved? Well, you take your background, what you're interested in, and make that a priority and put a program or an effort or service around that. And so what I've been able to do is work with schools and students to help them to understand the opportunities and career paths, not only with Salesforce, but with other SaaS applications and cloud computing in general.
You know, I think that's awesome, right? That's an example of a program being created that solved a challenge within a business culture. And ultimately has changed the culture of the students who are going to HBCUs and creating, I think, better candidates coming through the pipeline for organizations to hire. I think it's just remarkable, and it's something that I'm very proud to see grow and see the opportunities that are happening and the impact it's having for families to make generational change is just remarkable. Ruben, I gotta go to you, boss. Oh, anyone? What do you got? What do you got to say, Ruben?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, well, first, I always get so inspired listening to Tiffany talk about HBCU Force and just the potential and just the excitement, you know, around, you know, the work that she's doing. And I look forward to seeing how it changes the shape of the ecosystem. So it's always exciting to hear about that. So I'd start there. Outside of, you know, for me, I'd say outside of you know, my day-to-day work, I've always had an interest in the diversity, equity, inclusion, or equity space in general. You know, from sitting on the board of a civil rights nonprofit to, you know, speaking at local high schools on equity issues, and or even if it's just as simple as running the DEI programs at my kids' middle school. It's just where, you know, where I find myself most often. And so sort of the next logical step was during the pandemic, I put together a pandemic project for myself and went out to complete my DEI certification through Cornell, which was a great experience. I was reluctant at first because, you know, I feel like I always kind of felt like, you know, my life experience is enough of a certification. I don't need anything more than that at this point. But it was really helpful to understand, you know, specific DEI frameworks and models and understand, you know, how to name things, because sometimes when you're able to identify and name things, that's sort of the first step in order to solve problems and to look for solutions. So if anything, the certification and the work that I've been doing in the DEI space has really given me a lot of confidence to finally bring my full self to work and not keep those two worlds too separate. And that means in our implementations and our engagements with partners, with customers, that you know, I feel a lot more confident speaking out and raising my hand. So especially these days, where a lot of the nonprofits I work with, you know, have very strong diversity or inclusion statements. But oftentimes I find myself in an engagement where they say, you know what, we're not going to have any other, you know, users part of this design. It's really just going to be IT driving it. Well, you know, that's when I raised my hand and I said, well, wait a second, like I'm just going to tell you that that this doesn't really align with some of the things that you as an organization have put forth. You know, or there's been other situations, and these have happened where, you know, organizations have had very bold statements about their diversity and inclusion initiatives in how they recruit volunteers and volunteer candidates. But then I've been asked to build algorithms to select candidates that are never going to find people of color the way that they've designed it and the way they have historically been. So those are times, again, where I raise my hand and say, I can't do this in good conscience. We have to have some talks about it. And sometimes it's a good conversation, and other times I need to walk away because I know there's plenty of other consultants who will be willing to do that work. But I'd rather work with clients that value this same aspect of DEI the same way I do. So it's definitely translated into the work that we do. It's translated into the clients that we work with, and it's translated into the decisions that we make. So any RFP that we answer to, any proposal that we put forth, we say, hey, wait a second, like this is what we believe in, and this is something that's real for us, and this framework. And we just want to make sure upfront that our values are aligned before we continue working with each other. And like I said, overall, it's been very positive. Nonprofits that we work with it's really resonated with them, and we've been holding each other accountable. So it's been a real positive outcome so far. I think you're on mute there again.
I got it. I just think the AI use case is just so critical to think about it in that lens of why it's so critical to remove the jargon, to get additional stakeholders that otherwise not be part of those conversations engaged. And I just really appreciate you trying to make sure that even if someone doesn't go along with it, you've at least put the ideal of how this is going to impact them culturally and the resultant impact of what they're making the decision on. And I think it's so critical for the expertise that exists within our ecosystem and the knowledge to be delivered to organizations to help them drive change, because they are changing their culture and the rituals of how they interact. And so with that, I just want to kind of say, if there's any questions, feel free to ask a question. I am all game for anything. Like I said, I think it's just, for me, when you hear these stories about people taking the time to research, taking the time to use their core values, it starts making you think about how you can engage a customer. How do you engage your partners? How do you engage any conversation about any level? And how do you basically make sure that the communication it's jointly occurring? And I think it's really critical for our partners and for Salesforce and our customers to be willing to have those honest conversations that are transparent. And it's one of the things I actually really enjoy about my job. I get to do those every day. So are there any questions or anything that you would all like to speak to as a question comes in?
We wait for a question to come in. I might just put out a comment there. I think about, I know as Salesforce and as partners, we're relatively American-centric, but I know that there's been partners sort of globally listening in or going to catch the recordings of these sessions. And so I'll put myself out as a Canadian that HBCU didn't mean anything to me, and so I thought maybe it'd be worth you saying, you talked about us using jargon or terms, and I thought maybe I would just own up or be a little vulnerable in my when I needed to search that and learn a little bit more about that before today's meeting. So I don't know, Tiffany, if you wanted to give a little context to HBCU as sort of what the term means and I guess primarily what it means in America overall.
Yeah, so, and that's actually, I took the time to do that and add a slide specifically about that for my HBCU Force session tomorrow, just because I knew that some people are not familiar. But HBCUs are a designation that about 101 schools have here in the US. Most people are aware of the history of US and segregation. And years ago, HBCUs were the only colleges and universities that African Americans could attend to continue their education. And so the government gave these institutions land grants to build schools on. And so these are a list of 101 colleges and universities that have that history of years of educating Black and African Americans, as well as any other individual that went there, but primarily for African Americans.
Great call out, Jessica, about abbreviations. And again, that's a prime example of how do you actually make sure you have some type of background or abbreviations or cultural alignment. And I think, you and I have had discussions before in the past about what cultures mean across individual businesses. And I think it's very, very important. And it's a great reminder for me. Also in America and also part of Canada, they also have what's called tribal colleges and universities, which are focused on Indigenous people. And there's a separate designation for them. And then there's also Hispanic serving institutions, which based on the population of Hispanic or Latinx students also make up another designation for institutions within the United States, which are greater in number. Okay, I think if there's no other comments that anyone wants to make, I think we can run the poll. And I just want to say thank you for everyone taking the time to be part of this discussion. I really do appreciate everyone bringing their authentic self and being transparent, and how we can actually make better engagements from sales to partnership to just making sure our customers and in education have the impact that they want to have. So thank you.